Welcome to YourStory.com and welcome to this healthcare roundtable. We're going to be talking about the state of healthcare in India. It's a special time because I've got the leadership team from Nat Health. Let me set this in context and why healthcare is important, okay? Indian healthcare is unique. It's got a lot of positives, negatives. At one end, we've taken giant strides to make ourselves, look very good at the medical ecosystem with excellent clinical outcomes, right? On the other end, we have massive disease burdens. There are tangible dichotomies in delivery, and there's a huge infrastructure crunch. To solve this, we all have to get together, and that's what Nat Health is doing. It's the core of Nat Health to bring everyone, every stakeholder in the ecosystem to come together and make sure that healthcare is delivered better and that decision making becomes faster. And ma'am, welcome to the show. We've got Preeta Reddy, who's the executive vice chairman of Apollo Hospitals and also the president of Nat Health. Hi.
Hi, namaste, and thank you for
Namaste, ma'am. We've got Dr. Harsh Mahajan, who's the founder and chief radiologist at Mahajan Imaging, and also the senior VP at Nat Health. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Hi, doing well, doing well. Great to be here.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Shravan Subramaniam, who's the managing director, India and neighboring markets at Roche Diagnostics India Private Limited, and he's also the treasurer of Nat Health. How are you, Shravan? How's it going?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be a part of this discussion.
No, thank you. Your story is about, I told you, it's about innovation. It's about working with corporate to understand how startups can bring things to the fore. Firstly, ma'am, I'd like to know from you, could you tell us what Nat Health is about? I made a very brief introduction. I hope I'm right about it. But what is the mission of Nat Health? Can you tell us that, please?
So, Nat Health was started 7 years ago by Dr. Reddy, our chairman. And his agenda was very simple. He said, we have to bring different stakeholders who are really important in the healthcare ecosystem together so that, they can then become the single voice of healthcare. So we have every aspect of healthcare. You have the diagnostics, you have the best in class with Dr. Mahajan, yes. You have us who are the providers and many others like us. We have Shravan, who belongs to the diagnostics, holds a larger portfolio. But I think, and then we have people who are either in, medtech or education or every aspect of healthcare, including insurance and private equity. So I think, we do have like a right mix, a great representation, and it is a single unified voice of healthcare. So that's what Nat Health is. It also works with other bodies like, the FICCI or the Association of Healthcare Providers in India, FANA, and some international bodies also. Yes. And the simple, reason or focus to do this is, let's bring all the thoughts together. Let's bring a single-minded focus on how we execute on healthcare. So I think it's been a great journey. As an organization, we're really young. 7 years is a very short time in the annals of history. But in the 7 years, I think we've managed to come together brilliantly. A lot of thought leadership has happened. The voices are being heard in areas which matters, which is whether it's the public or the private sector. So I think Nat Health has really built credibility as it goes on. On India's healthcare, I think, I was on a fantastic panel yesterday with the head of Harvard Medical Systems, who's a great epidemiologist, somebody from the WHO, so they're all global voices. What they see is that India has actually done pretty well in terms of the COVID, because I think the early lockdown really was a great decision. Otherwise, the pandemic could have been so much worse. We have also managed to leapfrog in terms of using technology, global data to see if we can do our clinical pathways better and outcomes are better. So I think that's been a great learning. Innovation has been phenomenal. We're seeing multiple green shoots coming up with, healthcare ideas to see how can we provide better services. And with a single stroke of the pen on the 15th of August, the National Health Digital Mission was launched, which then, that's laudable because now it will really give access to more than 2/3 of our people. And I'm saying 2/3 and not 100% because it is work in progress. And 2/3 of our people will have digital access to some form of healthcare or the other, which has never been dreamt or thought about. So you're looking at public sector, really doing phenomenal work, bringing the best practices globally and doing one step better. You're looking at private sector healthcare, which is in the provider aspect, we're giving better outcomes than any of our peers sometimes in the Western world, in the developed world. And where we cannot, we're learning and we're being part of research. In the diagnostics, Dr. Mahajan, you should ask him. His company is doing some amazing work. And so is Shravan with, his Roche experience and what he's doing now. So I think you've got the best in class and all coming together at Nat Health. I can only say that despite COVID, things will get better. Can India position itself to heal the world? It definitely can. We're the largest English-speaking nation which can give this kind of healthcare. So I think we can if we come together. We've also shown that the manufacturing facilities have geared up in the past 3-4 months to provide, ventilators overnight, PPEs overnight, other diagnostic equipments overnight. So I think India can really do it. So if everything comes together and we have a little bit of support from the government, which I think we need. Even if it's not support, I think recognition would be great. And that's probably something which, it's like growing children.
Yeah.
You really need that support and recognition. And I think healthcare, private healthcare as a sector desperately needs it. And that's what Nat Health is hoping to see, is to raise the decibel, to raise the voices to a level where we know we're here. We are great Indians and we're doing phenomenal work. We are fighting the war shoulder to shoulder. So let's do it and let's be recognized. And I think we are the single voice of healthcare in India. And we hope to do so much more.
Yeah, there's a lot more. And I want to come back to you in a couple of minutes on, a word about the healthcare workers, the doctors who put in the time, the nurses, the support staff. I need your thoughts on that, on they are perhaps the best champions that we've had today, right? I mean, it's like a war for them. They've been there 24/7, ma'am. So doctor, I want to talk about the situation with you on the ground, right? I mean, 5 months in, what is the state of the pandemic at this point of time? What has Nat Health done over the last 5 months in the pandemic? And what's going on from your side in the imaging side of the business?
So the pandemic really has brought out some of the best in the healthcare industry. From the beginning, where we could do less than 1,000 RT-PCR tests across the country, to doing over 1.1 million tests in a day, it's a phenomenal leap. And this has been made possible by the medtech and the providers coming together. Most of the kits are being manufactured in India, which was not being done. I mean, this is something which is immense. And doing this probably may be a shade better than the PPEs and the ventilators that we've started manufacturing within the country, because this is very technical and you have to be very, very precise. But most of us end up using Indian kits for doing RT-PCR for COVID-19. And that is one reason, since we don't depend on importing. Of course, the imported material is available from Roche and others like them. But we don't need to depend on them, because there was a time in the pandemic when everyone wanted those kits. Correct. And there was only a finite quantity that was available. And that's where the Indian manufacturers came in. Credit also to the government that they were very quickly able to actually accredit them. so that they could start manufacturing on a large numbers, in large numbers, and be able to bring it out to the industry. The labs themselves, they geared up, and many who were doing other things like our own lab at Margin Imaging, which is called Caring DX. We have a genomics lab which was used for cancer genomics, and we pivoted and started using some of the equipment that was available to us to start doing RT-PCR for COVID. And since it was a must, as mandated by the ICMR and the government, that these should all be NABL accredited, NABL also rose to the occasion, and online accreditation was done, and very, very strictly done. 6 hours where these people, spent time going over each and every bit. In fact, we felt at the end of it that probably if it had been an in-person kind of inspection, it may not have been as strict as it was when they went step by step online. But within 2 to 3 days, the accreditation for doing COVID testing was obtained. And this was not only in our case, but so many others. So it has been a great journey. Then, digital transformation, which has happened, and which now is also the health mission, which is come into being, and which will lead, as Preeta said, to delivery of healthcare in the future. Because of that, we are able to collect data. After all, there are 3.9 million cases that have happened in this country. And with ICMR, with CSIR, with the government, with Niti Aayog, all coming together with the private healthcare sector, as well as the public healthcare sector, there's a wealth of data that's available. And this, if we can actually manage to collate, and we are working through Caring with CSIR, with the Institute of Genomics, a public institute of CSIR, to try to collate the data and then get learnings from it. Because this pandemic, as we hear the cliche, is not going away, but that's also reality. So our learning has to continue, how to minimize morbidity, how to minimize mortality. India is the lowest mortality in large nations in the world. And that is because we shared information, public, private, and were able to use best practices, also learn from the mistakes that happened in the early part of the pandemic in the Western part of the world, because this is a novel virus and we didn't know how it would behave. So we learned from where they went wrong, because luckily it hit us about a month and a half later as compared to the Western countries. Also, there is now an opportunity and a big push, and we are part of that, of developing artificial intelligence algorithms to help in early diagnosis of COVID-19, especially on X-ray of the chest and CT of the chest, and be able to use this data and to try to prognosticate. Oh yes, we do a lot of AI in our setup, and young 1, 2, 3 people, startups, youngsters, engineers, others, they can be part of this huge movement where these algorithms are produced not only for our country, but for the world.
Shravan, the key word that Dr. Harsh used was, data and AI, and being from the diagnostic side, right? I think for the first time, it took a crisis for the whole country to realize that we need a platform that can use multitudes of data. But is it easier said than done? Today we have the raw data, but it's a journey in the end of the day, right? And I'm sure Nat Health can help you.
Absolutely, Vishal. I think you said it right. It is a journey, and we're taking some steps in the right direction. And if there's one good thing that has come out of it, at least from a diagnostic standpoint, we have been on the headlines almost every day for the last 6 months or so. And perhaps some people are, becoming experts in this that they didn't know themselves. But think about it historically over the last several decades. Diagnostics, although it accounts for only maybe 2 or 3% of healthcare expenditure, has been providing information that informs treatment decisions for 2/3 of medical procedures across various specialties. So now it's important that there is recognition of this. And to your point, we are getting more and more data. And just over the last few months, if you look at it, as Preeta mentioned, we have the data digital policy now that makes it more accessible, makes data more accessible. And also there is this whole push towards integrity of data, data privacy, and the ability to use data from different sources and help clinicians make decisions. We started off in a state where we hardly had any awareness of the test of this product. We were testing in just one location in Pune, a couple of hundred samples a day, and now we've gone to hundreds of thousands a day, touching even 1 million. As far as Roche is concerned, we have enjoyed excellent partnership with the government. Within days of the test being made available globally, I'm talking just a couple of days, the Indian government gave us emergency authorization to bring the test in and provide it for the country. And now through various technologies, we're able to provide tens of thousands of tests per day. You take the PCR test, the RT-PCR test, there are what we call the open channel systems, which are widely available all over the country, which are also able to use the Indian reagents, the Indian kits, right? So the combination of very sophisticated hardware with kits that are made anywhere in the world, that is very potent when you're talking about scaling up. We also have the high-end system, which can do, 1,000 to 3,000 tests a day. That is serving exclusively to the government at the moment. We don't yet have enough capacity to support the private sector because the demand is so high, but we're getting there. Eventually, that will be the plan for private and public to cooperate in this space. The antibody test, we have capacity immediately to support 500,000 tests a day if required. That has been a little slower to pick up because of various reasons, including, now that PCR tests are widely available and the utility of antibody tests are being actively debated. That has been a little slower to pick up, but we're seeing good traction in that as well. Very soon, we'll also have a rapid antigen test, which has very high sensitivity of 96+% sensitivity and 98+% specificity. So these could be game changers when you're talking about opening up the economy again, right? The last few weeks has all been about unlocking, and we should not be reckless about unlocking because the virus hasn't taken a break. But we have decided to get back in, and offices are opening, shops are opening. So we need to continue to be extremely careful while also providing technologies for testing where people are able to get their results very quickly in 15-20 minutes. Right now, my concern is actually something slightly different because I believe for the most part, the testing needs are either accelerating to the point or reached a point where we are more or less able to support the immediate and near-term needs of the country. But what we are seeing from, as Roche and also as the in vitro diagnostic industry at large, one of my big concerns is that there has been a very sharp decline in oncology testing. Okay.
Absolutely.
There's been a dramatic fall in cardiovascular testing, neuro, endocrinology. And these are very, very alarming to me. Leaving aside the business aspect of it, I'm not touching that for a second. I'm saying from a clinical utility standpoint, understanding, diagnostics is not a one-time, something that takes place in just one point in time. It is part of the continuum of care, whether it's screening of asymptomatic patients or diagnosing a symptomatic patient or monitoring someone who is undergoing treatment. And if I'm seeing a 50% fall in cancer diagnostics, what that probably could imply is that people who need urgent care, either people who could be screened and be prevented from progressing into the next stage of cancer, or people who need urgent care who are not getting it now and they go to hospitals later when they're in an advanced state, we might see that happening over the next 2, 3, 6 months. We're going to see an influx of patients that we may not be able to handle in terms of capacity. And then there's going to be a cost burden also to society to manage these patients who are coming in that could have otherwise been treated. So to me, that is a very alarming situation, and something that we as a healthcare community need to address.
Yeah.
There are many reasons for this. There's the potential trust deficit with certain healthcare providers, and also confidence for patients to come back to hospitals and outpatient centers to seek treatment. I can speak a lot more about that, but I'll hand it back to you.
I think, I mean, I want to talk to Preeta ma'am. Ma'am, this complexity, I mean, like Dr. Shravan said, you touch healthcare in India, there's a thought to go towards negativity, but we have to stay positive in this entire outcome because we are in this fight together, right? When you look at this complexity of scale within India, how are we going to solve it? It almost took a pandemic to wake us up and say, we have to do this now. Like Make in India should happen. I think on the ventilator side, like Dr. Harsh and Shravan mentioned, it's really happening at a faster pace. And there's a role of data also. But how do you see all this coming together is something I want to talk to you, because you guys have scaled business over the last 40, 50 years. I'd like to know, can we solve this complexity faster? Or is it going to take a lot more help from the government and, bring in all the young startups to participate in this journey also?
So I think it's multiple things. It's a whole ecosystem which has to come into play. One is, of course, this digital is so cool. We all love it.
Yeah.
I think it's really healed the world, which is great if it really heals the world. The point of care will shift from, brick and mortar hospitals to more to patients' doorsteps.
Yes.
People will be able to take more charge of their health simply because they can. You'll see multiple apps. You'll see things, in your telephones, 5G technology. So I think what it will do is it will definitely help us take charge of our health. So that's point number one. Point number two is that you will see while we're, seeing COVID and we're frightened, alarmed, shocked, whatever about COVID, there's another enemy which is, definitely beyond our backyards. It's within our ecosystem, and that's the onslaught of NCDs. You heard Shravan. And if people are just so frightened that they don't come to hospitals and they hold back, a stage 1 cancer will land up as stage 4 cancer. So it's going to cost you more in terms of, cost of care. It's going to cost the insurance companies more because they're going to have to, in a way pay those bills, or the governments more. So everyone stands to lose. It's literally a lose-lose situation by just being frightened.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to think negatively at this point of time and encourage all the people watching
we
this.
need to say, okay, fine, now we need to live with this. Use the mask, do social distancing, do everything you have to, but just get yourself checked up. And you have to have some kind of a physical throughput to get checked. While you can take charge of your health, you can stay healthy, you can adopt better habits, you can learn, see, understand more. Your health data will be available globally, digitally, God knows what. There is still the requirement of a physical interface, and that will happen. So that's really that's the real situation. What do we have on hand, India as a country? We have a certain amount of infrastructure. 80% of healthcare is still given by the private sector. The responsibility of both education and health is a fundamental right. So every citizen is entitled to high quality healthcare. How can they get it? So we need to be accessible, we need to be affordable, and more than anything else, we need to be accountable. And this can happen if the private sector is really, in a way, supported. So we need to build more. To build more, we need to fund more. To fund more, we need to find the funds. So I think that is one aspect. To deliver more, you need to skill more. So, the skills have to develop, which means you need more doctors, you need more nurses, you need more technicians to run the labs and the samples and stuff like that. And you can't wish it away. I don't think, digital technology can do everything, but digital technology can fast track a lot of stuff. And then there is training and education. And I think now e-learning has really come to stay. It's become the norm. And because of that, you can skill more. So people have to be encouraged to adopt it and skill themselves more and then deliver more. So that's very important. One aspect which I think has been phenomenal globally is telemedicine. We as a group started telemedicine in India, and on any given day, we're doing about 3,000 to 4,000 consults.
Yeah, ma'am, correct me if I'm wrong, but come to think of it, it's only after March 23rd did our telehealth policy come into the fore, right? I mean, in a proper regulated way, right?
And it's not only India. America has woken up and said, hey, this telemedicine, it's such a big thing. Yesterday, Kaiser Permanente on a call was saying that we do 40,000 tele-consults a day. So this has become the norm, which means it cuts the time for somebody to travel from home to a healthcare system because they can get opinions. But that doesn't mean that the healthcare infrastructure, the physical infrastructure still needs to be ramped up. Paying for healthcare still, and the cost of healthcare, you can't wish it away. You can't say, this is the cost of healthcare by somebody who hasn't even delivered healthcare. So I think all this irrational pricing, irrational costing, dreaming big but not achieving big, all these things I think have to become reality. And so that's why I think that, people who've really done this kind of work, like three of us on the panel, for example, there are 300 more people in the country who can contribute. And we might belong to the private sector, but we are Indians and we love India. So why can't our voices be heard to deliver for Indians? And I think that's really what the future should be about.
Okay. Ma'am, the next question I'm going to ask you is about, because I've been covering data and AI for a while now, Reliance Jio has happened, and there's a narrative there that says, we are going to get all the data from the pharmaceuticals and the Kirana stores, right? So there's consumption data of medicine. Then there is data from hospitals. Then there's data from clinics. I mean, if we are moving towards that digital journey, why aren't we able to bridge this entire stack together? Is that what the health stack is all about? I wanted your thoughts on that, and the other panelists, Dr. Harsh, Dr. Shravan, to take this also. This single view. I see everybody has data in India, but like you said, we are Indians. How do we get together to do this?
So somebody who strings those pearls right will walk away with a necklace. So I don't know who that's going to be, but it will happen. And I'm going to rest here because the two experts are the other two.
Let's take their thoughts too.
Dr. Mahajan and Shravan should be talking about this.
Go on, Dr. Harsh.
Thanks, Preeta. Well, we do have data, but how useful is that data? In a hospital, and this is not only India. Even if you look at the more advanced countries like the US, even in the same healthcare system, one hospital may not be able to talk to the other. So this is not a problem that's unique to India, but since just as we did with our cellular telephones, where we leapfrogged, probably because we are so primitive as yet in terms of data, collection, collation, analysis, maybe we may be able to leapfrog here as well. The problem about data is that it's lying, like you said, disparately all over.
Yes.
And who brings it together? Number one. Number two, do we have the permissions to bring it together? What is the legal position? That is still to be outlined. There are still many open-ended questions there about healthcare data, especially about a patient's diagnostics or treatment history. Who owns the data? As far as we know, it's the patient who owns the data. Until such time he is not permitted you to use it, even in an anonymized form, how can you use it? Can he take you to court? Suppose you use chest x-rays of 100,000 patients who visited your hospital without their permission, developed an AI algorithm, which is fantastic. Can he take you to court and say, this data was used without my permission? So there are huge challenges there, even if you were able to bring it together. So these are challenges of the future. Without meeting these challenges, without getting the legal framework in place, I don't think we will reach anywhere. Of course, we have the talent, we have the engineers, we have the IT professionals, we have the startups with the vision, with the passion to build. It has to be parts of a whole ecosystem. One company being able to do it or one organization being able to do it probably may not happen. But a huge conglomerate coming and buying small pieces and putting them together, that can happen and that will happen. That is how, these huge conglomerates which we have today have been formed. So I think this is an area where the youngsters who are hearing your program need to gird their loins and really get ready to attack. And this is going to be good for society. It's going to be good for nations. It's going to be good for the world. And you will make money in the process as well, doing something which is good for society. As far as margin imaging and caring is concerned, we do work in the field of radiology, and there we've developed a platform which can house radiology AI algorithms, which can actually validate them on hospital data itself. And also at the same time, this platform can be hooked up to your existing picture archival systems or radiology information systems or hospital information systems, so that you actually start to use these. And I believe that in the years to come, this is going to become very, very useful. It'll make our diagnosis very accurate. It'll make targeted treatment possible. It will improve the efficiency of doctors. And also, most importantly, it'll reduce healthcare costs and also be able to fill the manpower gap, which even if we start running today, we are standing. Even if we were to start a 100-meter dash, it'll still take at least a decade before we can make up all the deficiencies in manpower, skilled manpower that we have. But I think this is the future, and the government has done well to bring out the digital piece. And now we need to start working on it. Thank you.
It's funny. It's a great point. It's funny that we are, we as consumers, we are happy to share our data with all the restaurant aggregators and get, and eat unhealthy food, but we don't want to share our health data with doctors. It's really a strange situation for us. Dr. Shravan, thoughts on this? Thoughts on this, on data sharing, privacy, how NatHealth can contribute to that? Yeah, we have a digital thing coming around. Yes, we are adding a lot of ecosystem partners, but what has to be done to scale this up?
The holy grail for the medical device, pharma, diagnostics businesses that work hand in hand with the healthcare service providers is what we're calling PHC, personalized healthcare, or precision medicine. And the definition of this has also been changing over the years as we learn more and more about disease and the technology that helps us work on this. To illustrate this, say a little over 20 years ago, when I was in medical college, when Dr. Harsh and I might have been in medical college, when we are talking about, say, lung cancer, it's a pretty nasty disease with maybe at that time, there were only a couple of different types of known types of lung cancer and a couple of different types of therapy. You either blast them with chemotherapy or you blast them with radiotherapy, and the outcomes were not that great. You fast forward to maybe 10 years later, and there was an introduction of targeted therapies, where there were specific therapies for a certain category of cancers, and they had very good outcomes. But it was a bit hit or miss, because there was some that responded extremely well and some that that really did not take off at all. Now you look at today, you have dozens and dozens of genetic markers for one particular tissue type, and you have several drugs that are targeted for that specific gene, which gives you very, very positive, very excellent outcomes for that particular gene or that particular tissue type. Now, 20 years ago, when they first introduced the technology to map the human genome, it took 1 decade and about $1 billion to map the human genome. Okay? Today, you can get it for a couple of $100. You can map the entire genome. And if you're looking at some lung tissue or any other cancer tissue, you can get your results within days, maybe even hours, and you're going to get the information that you need. But it is humanly impossible for one clinician to map all that data and come up with a decision for a patient who is nothing but N of 1. So in order to make a meaningful decision for N of 1, you need data from an entire population or a community or a certain type of disease. And who holds that data, who owns that data is one point. I clearly support that the patient should own that data. But who manages it, who brings it together, how interoperable are these data sources? And you know, we often have this debate in the industry: do you want to be the Apple or the Android of healthcare data? And how do you allow manipulation of said data to make meaningful treatment decisions? These are the questions that we are debating in the industry. I firmly believe, and here I'm speaking as an individual, not necessarily representing the views of any company or organization, that collaboration is critical for this, because no one company or no one healthcare system is going to be able to crack this by themselves. So we need to have that openness, and this is where I think NatHealth can play an extremely vital role to bring different categories of healthcare providers, technology providers, startups, all together to contribute to this N of 1 precision medicine.
You know, that's fantastic. And now I want to get into the role of EdTech for doctors. I've been telling doctors that, you know, yes, it's a tough time for everybody, but, you know, digital has also enabled them to pick up courses faster, learn faster, ma'am. Do you see, I mean, what do you think? I mean, with the state of, you know, the healthcare industry in terms of health colleges and, you know, what, we have 1 million doctors, they say. Is it less than 1 million that we have in our country?
Around that much.
Around that much, right? So I don't know. I mean, everybody, when you look at EdTech and you read the newspapers, go on, ma'am, you were saying.
I said you need 3 million to treat that 1.3 billion, at least.
That's interesting. That's what I'm saying, right? And we hear, when I open the newspapers, I hear about unicorns in EdTech, but we don't have anybody in health tech, EdTech, right? I don't know why can't the higher education industry, you know, scale up medical, you know, learning through digital? Is it, I mean, again, it's a journey, but as it started, but you yourself see in the hospital side, the doctors need reskilling or upskilling, like we say, right? Is that happening?
So we ourselves, and this is Apollo, within the Apollo system, we have started digital EdTech, MedTech, but I think it's not enough. And, you know, we need to scale. You need funding to scale up. You need all those pieces of the pie to come together. But I think you will see that happening because most doctors, the younger generation who are now star super performers, are very digital savvy, and they definitely want to upskill. They definitely want to, you know, learn much more than what they do when they come out of their colleges. The postgraduate education in medical, I think, is going to be a very exciting field.
I think so too. Why can't NatHealth become an open source for EdTech for doctors, and also bring the data guys, the technology guys? I know you have a digital conference in 20 days, I think there's one. So I think you should become an open platform where everybody contributes data and there's something done out of it.
Well, we'll take your advice and see what we can do.
No, but it's great, ma'am. I'm saying, I keep telling doctors to take statistics courses, you know, like my wife does a lot of papers and I say, where do you validate this data? But she's not a statistician, so she doesn't understand. She takes that data from somebody else and curates it. I'd rather say that doctors need to understand the clinical progress of their patients, and probably it's the right time for people like Nat Health to, even use the EdTech platforms. So many of these startups out there.
Of course, in that space, there is so much more we can do in the medtech, medical education, yes. Even providing care. There's a lot to be done.
That's true. That's true. And Doctor, you were saying, Shravan.
No, I was just saying any time spent studying regression analysis is time very well spent. I highly recommend that whenever I speak to graduate students or medical students, that's very valuable. And also to the point that you were addressing to Preeta about Nat Health facilitating. This is something that we have done even last year when we had a conference. We brought together a lot of startups, and we had a very open, free-flowing exchange between the healthcare service providers, the medtech companies, and the startups. So we're already starting to do that, but you're suggesting that we need to scale this up, and we need to make this story known that Nat Health is open for business. We want this sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. I know we're running short of time, and my final question, starting with Preeta, and pandemic is here, the economy is going to open up. What would you advise people to do? I mean, we've already spoken about the doctors and the ecosystem. What's generally going to happen, ma'am, between the fear psychosis that's happening? We need the economy to be running. What can we do? What's going to happen next 6-7 months? Something into the future that young people can gauge at and be prepared.
I think being prepared is very important. You would not dive into a deep end without knowing how to swim. Yes. Nor would you stick your hand into a boiling cauldron of hot water either. You wait till it cools. Yes. Similarly, this COVID is going to be there for a long time. We just need to get on with our lives, get on with doing what we have to do, whether it's the hospital or whichever sector, because people need jobs, people need to live, they need to survive. So while doing that, there's no point being foolish and not wearing your mask or not washing your hands or maintaining social distancing, because now there is data to show that if you do these simple 3 things, you'll actually be better off. Right. And I think we need to do that. And then there's now a lot of data coming out that, if you really take care of your immunity or the condition of your health, which I'm saying is either it's your lungs or your cardiac status or diabetes, if you just take care of that, then your risks are much less. We're seeing fatalities, for people with huge comorbidities. So maybe the comorbidities going forward, we need to take care of, try and see it. Yes. And try and be careful. And, if you have symptoms, then go and check and get treatment done. So I think people's mindset also has to change, and we need to learn to be able to live with it. But we have to get on with our lives.
That's very nice, ma'am. Dr. Harsh, your thoughts, please.
See, I would take off from where Preeta left and say that prevention, we know, is better than cure. It is also for society cheaper than cure. And so, as she said very rightly, we have to try to avoid getting the illness. And for that, the onus rests with us, on us. And also, this is still, we are very early into the pandemic. A huge amount of work may have gone into it. We may have learned what is going on. But the coming months and years are going to teach us much, much more about the disease. We already know that this is not just a disease which affects the lungs. It affects all body organs. In fact, affects probably the blood vessels more than anything else, and consequently affects all organs of the body. Already we have data showing that in those who had mild disease also and were completely cured, a few weeks down the line when an MRI of the heart was done, in 78% of them we found changes. So we don't know what this will mean in terms of problems going further down in life, and it'll be more important for the youngsters. So this narrative, which was there in England, it was there in Sweden, that let's get infected, let the youngsters
Herd
get
immunity.
infected, and we will have herd immunity, protect the old. But we are seeing that it's even though those with comorbidities and the elderly are dying more than the youngsters,
Yes.
but what permanent effects this disease may have on us, even if we are 20, 25 years old, we don't know. And it's only time that will tell. So I would say we need to learn to live with the disease. We need to learn to give a digital hug rather than a physical hug. And we need to remember that living in isolation, there may be some mental issues which some people face, but if you're hardy enough and if you realize you're protecting yourself, it'll be much, much better for you in the long run. Let us not try to aim 70% of infection and look at herd immunity. Let's get over this time till a proper vaccine actually comes. And even that will take many months and years for the entire population to get vaccinated. We are 1.3 billion people. And actually, this is a vaccine which will need to be given globally, because we are now a global village. I mean, this is not a disease that arose in India. It came from abroad. And so, one has to be very, very careful, but life has to go on. And within these constraints, we have to try to do the best we can. And e-learning is fantastic. And
Yeah.
even people who were not used to digital have now learned it. The webinars are, in fact, people think there are too many of them now. And but this is the way, at least the future is going to be for a few years to come. And let's embrace it, and let's not get infected.
That's great. Wear a mask. That's a simple thing that
It's
people can
simple,
do.
so simple.
That's true. That's true. Dr. Shravan.
Thanks, Vishal. Any decision that we make in healthcare, by and large, whether it's in a clinical trial setting or in a patient setting, in a clinical setting, is a balance between safety and efficacy. Right? And that's where the onus lies on the clinician to make a decision, or for a drug company to launch a product or not. So we need to have that sort of thinking as well when we're looking at the real life decisions that we're making towards COVID. As we unlock, let us consider safety, let us consider efficacy. Yes, we've taken a battering in the economy, 23.9% hit to the GDP, and therefore we must strive to get back to business as usual. But there are a lot of things that are within our control to manage safety. And protect each other, and protect the vulnerable ones, protect the people on the front lines. So, and we have mastered this over the years with other diseases, although it's not a direct correlation. When HIV came about in the 80s and 90s, that led to universal precautions in hospitals, and you don't hear anymore of hospital-acquired HIV. That just doesn't happen anymore, although it might have happened earlier. So there are precautions that we can take. We have learned how to do this. Now it is, of course, beyond the hospitals. It's also for the general population, so it can be done. So I would say, let us, as a medical community, study the data, learn from the experts, learn from each other, and for patients and the population at large, trust the system and seek care when you need it.
Okay, that's fantastic, guys. That brings us a close to this panel. Go to nathealth.org. Have I got the website right? Right, that's the one, right? Go to nathealth.org if you're a startup. Come to us if you want to meet these brilliant leadership team from nathealth.org. Thank you, Preeta Reddy, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Harsh. Thank you, Dr. Shravan. Thank you. Listen to me, guys. Wear a mask, wear gloves. Make sure that you keep some social distancing. But if you really want to innovate, Go to Nat Health, check it out. And if you want to read more stories on these great people, check out yourstory.com. I'm your business editor, Vishal Krishna. Dr. Shravan is going to say something. Go on.
Sorry, just a quick correction, nathealthindia.org, but I'm sure.
Okay, that's nathealthindia.org, guys. Go check it out. Preeta, saying something.
I think too, and we should have said it in the beginning, but it's always good to have the last word, that the
Please.
Corona warriors in our country, you know,
Yes.
people who have just worked on the front lines, we have to really salute them, thank them and their families. Many have lost their lives. So while we salute the soldiers and the army, I think this time it's really the Corona warriors who fought this war. So let's acknowledge the tremendous service they've done for us.
No, certainly, ma'am. And I think most of you, please make sure that doctors in your community are accepted. Don't treat them as outcasts, doctors, nurses, and don't trust the media and whatever they say in terms of, you know, that this infection is going to get you or whatever. These are healthcare workers. They're fighting for you. Thank you very much. Again, Dr. Shravan, it's nathealthindia.org. Preeta, ma'am, thank you very much. Harsh, thank you. Dr. Shravan, I'll see you in a bit. Bye. Bye, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.